Hi, everyone, and welcome to the final episode of the Hash for the week. What an awesome week this has been, and lots of exciting news to dig into today. We are, of course, your daily beat on crypto and culture, and I'm joined by our wonderful co-hosts. We have Ben Powers, Jen Sanasie, Will Foxley, Zack, Seward, and I'm Naomi, Brockwell, and we're going to dive straight into this Friday show for you by talking about Doge. Now, the Dallas Mavericks, something happened there. They've jumped on the Doge bandwagon. So let's know what's going on there, Jen.
Well, I love starting my Friday off with cute animals. So Dogecoin is off to the NBA. The Dallas Mavericks will soon be accepting Doge as part of an agreement with BitPay. So in a release, Mark Cuban, who is a crypto advocate, he's very public about his support for everything crypto, said that, the Dallas Mavericks are doing it just because they can. So my question to you guys is, this coin started as a joke. It's seeing huge mainstream adoption this year with support from people like Mark Cuban and Elon Musk. If someone were to tell you this when Doge was first created, what would you have thought? Will, I'm going to kick it to you since you had that awesome hat on before the show.
Where'd the hat go, Will?
Oh, I can still put it on for later, though. Last 5 minutes of the show. It's a treat. When Doge was first created, it was like 2015? Do you guys know the year? I don't know.
Around there.
Around there?
Yeah,
okay.
well, no,
there.
it was earlier than that because I was doing videos on it in 2014.
Okay. Well, I would have not understood Doge at all if you told me at the time it was created.
No one did.
The interesting thing to me is that Mark Cuban was like a prolific Bitcoin hater for years. And then this year, he just like flipped the script. So I'm wondering what you guys think about that. Is he just like riding on the bandwagon of crypto all of a sudden because it's popular, or does he really get it?
Well, if he really got it, would he be accepting Doge? I mean, come on.
There you go. That's a good answer. They're taking Bitcoin too. But
They've
Doge,
been taking Bitcoin
is...
for, I think, the last 2 years.
Okay. Interesting.
Yeah, I think his summation of just, why are we doing this? Because we can pretty much encapsulates Doge like in one sentence. It's only here because we can. And so, this is maybe just an extension of that idea and, being able to play with this cryptocurrency just because he can. I think, Cuban's a smart guy, right? He's a pretty prolific investor. He looks at various projects and, maybe he was a Bitcoin hater, but I do think like this is a flip. And I think he's, keeping in touch with it and making sure he's understanding it, to a higher level than most people are, if he's like really running with this. And he recognizes the absurdity of Doge in some ways, right? I think that also signals that he kind of knows what's up as opposed to just like earnestly getting behind this or, our buddy Gene Simmons with Cardano, let's say.
Well, he did say also in the press release that. Sorry, I just wanted to say one thing. He strongly recommended that anyone who wants to learn about Doge to ask their teenagers who are on TikTok because they would be able to educate. So I don't know if that changes anyone.
He's not totally wrong.
Yeah, I mean, he also sort of like was like, I give my kids Doge as a economics lesson, and he's just riding the moment. He's just leaning into the memes, and there's nothing wrong with that. He's embracing the nihilism of the cryptocurrency markets, and if you want to pay him in Doge or if you want to pay him in dollars, he's happy to take that money to the bank, I'm sure. So his ability to do this, I think, is fun, and I do like his quote quite a bit. Just the earth-shattering reason that we can. Oh no! So I think he's in on the joke, and I think it's interesting to see. If Doge becomes a major force in the payments realm, then we'll have Mark Cuban to blame. But that would be pretty cool.
Oh my gosh,
Naomi, no.
No, I love the internet. I love that this is a thing and people are jumping on it. It just is endlessly delightful. I also want to point out that last tweet, how ironic it is for someone to be asking for professional advice from Mark Cuban while he has a picture of an emoji of an eggplant in his in his handle. I just really enjoyed that. Doge is like this fascinating world, right? Because it's not economically sound money. It's an infinite supply. And that's why it was this joke coin. No one took it seriously, because Bitcoin came out and it's like, we're changing fundamentally the economics. We're saying, no, you cannot just print this at will. No, there is a finite supply and it's going to be subject to supply and demand. And the values eventually, it's going to go up because it's so scarce. And then Doge came along and it's like, we're going to keep the printing presses rolling and we're also a dog. And the internet's like, okay, that's really fun. And it was meant to be useless. And, I actually found an old Dogecoin wallet from ages ago. And I was like, oh, wow, let me check this out. This must be worth a fortune now. And I think it was worth like $2 at the time. Because Doge is just like, it's kind of useless currency. Interesting that they're jumping on it, but I hand it over to you guys.
Yeah, I guess as long as the excitement, as long as the developers can keep pace with the excitement, I think we'll be in decent shape. I want to shout out Colin Harper's recent piece about some of the devs. There's only a few of them in the world who are keeping this $5 to $10 billion concern
for a while.
afloat. Yes. So as long as the development cycle can keep pace with the hype cycle, we should be in good shape. On some of these coins, the cost of attacking these networks is fairly low. So I think there was an upgrade recently that may be helpful toward protecting this network as people pile in. But that work certainly must continue, as any open source advocate will tell you. So sorry, Ben, what do you got?
No, I was going to pull up that Colin Harper article, Zach, because I think it's so key in terms of thinking about this, right? When you have this surge of demand that's driven almost solely by sheer force of personality of like Elon Musk and Mark Cuban and stuff, like that's a scale and an increase that like the technical developers like probably were not expecting. And Zach, you referenced it, like, and I think that an update has been done, but originally when this was starting to happen, there was the potential for things like a 51% attack that could actually occur and be much cheaper than comparable attacks on other networks. And so, I think that this is cool as kind of play money for, Mark Cuban's kids to play with. But I think that it's really important with anybody's looking at any cryptocurrency to really understand like the back end technical side and what some of the issues that could be at hand there are.
Absolutely. Speaking of upgrades, let's change gears and go to the world computer. Ethereum developers met today and made the decision to greenlight EIP 1559. And, it sounds like in the weeds, but I'm telling you, it's really important. This puts sort of developers versus miners a little bit in conflict on the world's second largest blockchain by market value. So, Will, you filed this story. I think you were on the dev call today. Tell me what happened exactly, and then let's zoom out and say why it's important.
Yeah, for sure. I love the world computer note. That never gets old. It's kind of useful once you understand it, but it's certainly hilarious. So EIP 1559 essentially is a way of flipping the blockchain transaction fee schedule like on its head. So if you have sent a transaction with Ethereum or Bitcoin ever, you know that you have to basically, you have a fee that's kind of like told you how much you need to pay to send your crypto. And that is an approximation that miners will tell you based on like how many other people are trying to send transactions at that time. But with Ethereum and with the use cases that they're saying, it's kind of making it difficult for the network to scale. And it's also really, really difficult for first-time users who a lot of Ethereum developers want to catch for their applications. So what they're basically doing is creating a base fee, which is like a bounded range for how much you're going to have to pay for a transaction, with an optional tip to miners. That option is really not an option, like you have to pay at some point. But it's going to be a lot smaller than a normal transaction fee to miners right now. Last month, Ethereum miners had $1.3 billion in revenue alone, with 50% of that coming from transaction fees, which is like a huge record that has never been seen before, that amount of fees sent to miners. So this whole update is supposed to help address that. It won't necessarily lower transaction fees, but it'll help with a lot of the user interface design, which is pretty interesting. Kind of getting back to the miner versus developer issue here. A lot of miners don't want this because they're going to lose a lot of money from this update. And so they're not necessarily very happy. And there's even been talks of like hard forking the network or a future 51% attack. It seems pretty unlikely because they have a lot more to lose from them doing it. But if it did happen, a lot of fireworks, that'd be interesting.
Yeah.
Cool. So let me tee up the broader significance. So right now, we are in the moment of NFT mania, and most NFTs live on Ethereum. And as people are discovering that sticker price on any given silly image that you really want to buy also has the cost of that transaction that you need to provide to make sure that is recorded on the blockchain. So we're in this moment where sort of demand is overwhelming supply a little bit in terms of bandwidth and in terms of fee structure. And so things are growing. So I guess the question is, and again, this is for Ethereum 1.x before Ethereum 2.0 comes out. So just keep Ethereum 2. We're gonna keep that on the side of this conversation entirely. That doesn't involve miners at all. That's a proof of stake network. That's still a couple of years out. So this improvement is scheduled for July. I guess the question is this going to make Ethereum more user friendly, or is this just going to be an incremental update that isn't going to move the needle in terms of embracing new users to this network? And I guess I'll throw that to Naomi on this one.
Oh gosh, I'm the wrong person. I think we should throw it back to Will, because when it comes to all of these different options here, I would personally love to know whether this is going to bring down fees and whether I can buy Jen's the hash NFT that she made a few weeks ago, where I'm going to pay like $700. Will, so what's the TLDR? Am I going to be able to afford this?
Do you really want to buy an NFT from Jen, first of all?
Yes, so badly.
Wow, Will.
I'm going to buy the piece of Leon NFT.
We're getting back to this topic. No, it won't necessarily lower fees, but it will put fees in like a more bounded range. So if you've ever sent a transaction on a blockchain, like with Bitcoin or Ethereum, it's so hard to guess how much you're supposed to spend on a transaction fee. Typically, people are always overspending because it just gives you a suggestion, and that suggested price just goes straight to miners, and they just make bank off of this. Like I said, they make $1.3 billion last month alone, with 50% of that coming from fees. So this is supposed to help people estimate how much they're going to need to pay for a fee. So if I'm a first-time user on MetaMask and I want to take a loan out on Compound, right now, I'm probably going to be paying like double or more of what I need to pay for a fee. But here, it's going to give me a good range where I'm going to pay, and then I can just like click it and say yes. So transaction fees are still going to be high relative where they were a year ago, because that's a whole issue with scaling Ethereum, which is what Zack mentioned, which is ETH2. So this fixes like a UX issue that Ethereum has, and it desperately needs it to come along. ETH2 is like, hopefully will lower fees. We'll see if that happens, but that's kind of like the
when
broader
that happens in 5 years' time.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So the
Sorry
fee
to
problem
hate on
is
your
still a
NFTs.
problem. No, that's okay.
Yeah, it will always be a problem. No, I'm just kidding.
So why are the and Will, I'm going to ask you more questions about this, because this is really in the weeds for the most part too. And so in terms of like, why are miners against this, right? Like my read of the article when I was reading it earlier was that, kind of the miners' tips are going to be optional, that users can include now, as opposed to built into the cost of the transaction. So like, is that why they're upset about it? Like, give me a sense of, because it seems like, you talked about like a hard fork of Ethereum potentially, like that's a huge freaking deal if things ever got to that point. So yeah, help me out here.
Yeah, so traditionally, blockchains, the transaction fee is paid entirely to the miner network. So if you think of mining, there's two rewards they get. They get a base subsidy, like the block. It's also called the coin base, which is like for Bitcoin, it's like 6.25 or something like that Bitcoin per block if you mine the whole block yourself. And then also the transaction fees added on that. So whatever transactions you package in the block, you get all the money for people paying to put their transaction to that block. Now, all those transaction fees are going away and they're being burnt to the network. So Ethereum's inflation schedule is actually going to become deflationary with this. So, there's going to be less ether in the network because they're going to continuously be burning a lot of ether. The whole issue and schedule itself, I should note, won't be deflationary, but this is a deflationary pressure on the supply of ether. Just some nerd speak there. But yeah, the whole point is that miners aren't happy because they made like $700 million last month. And once this goes into effect, all that money goes away. And so mining is an industrial business, takes years of prep to source machines, put these farming equipment together to get people to join your pool. And with this update, they're basically having the rug pulled out from them, they would say. They've had quite a long time to see this coming, and ETH2 is always transitioning the network away from mining. So mining Ethereum is always kind of a short-term gamble, but they're unhappy because they're losing a lot of money. So that is kind of the idea.
Okay.
Yeah, this is a major development. I think it's, at the very least, it's interesting in terms of governing decentralized networks with lots of different stakeholders and lots of money at play. And maybe ultimately it will make Ethereum the playground of minnows as opposed to whales. And that would be a good thing for the technology, in my opinion. We're going to take a break right here and go to a pause. Next up, we're going to talk about Bill Gates, Bitcoin, and energy consumption. So that's going to be fun. Stick with us. Thanks.
You're trying to find another word that begins with B.
Bye, everybody.
How much did that make sense? Welcome back to the Hash. You can't get away from me. I'm still going to be monologuing, so just sit tight. We're going to move next to Bill Gates, who once again has opined on Bitcoin in a recent Clubhouse talk that Esquire wrote up. He decided once again that Bitcoin is worthless and you should not invest in it. Here on the Hash, as media, we're not going to tell you to do one way or the other. I think all of us have an opinion that's different than his. But basically, his argument was that Bitcoin is bad for the environment, which has been debunked by a lot of crypto enthusiasts in the past. And I want to toss this down to Zack to kind of walk us through those arguments, which I'm assuming you're familiar with.
Well, I mean, I think that the energy debate is really interesting. I would point people to Nick Carter, CoinDesk columnist Nick Carter's fine body of work on this very topic. He looks at the ways that people should be thinking about what this energy is being used for, rather than just being some like extraneous waste of electricity. There's big ideas here that are important, and electricity may be a worthwhile trade-off to accomplish some of those goals. I don't know. I don't know what my take is on all of this energy FUD. I hate to say FUD. I'm not a big believer in the word FUD as a concept, but the energy FUD is out there, and it's a bit rampant. As Bitcoin takes off, we see people get really excited about how much electricity it's consuming to maintain this network of cross-border currency. So I'm not sure what my take is, and I'm not sure why we often look to these old tech figureheads to provide incisive commentary on new tech and what it may or may not bring about. So I'm going to boot this one to Naomi, because I bet she's going to bring the fire here. So let's see.
Naomi has a take. Well, first of all, I mean, that's a 180 by Bill Gates, because he used to say that Bitcoin was a technological tour de force back in the day. And then now he's like, well, you know, he really likes to put his finger up to the wind and say, what do people want me to say? And the whole environmental debate around crypto is like, it's very much a zeitgeist of the moment, as I think, honestly, government narrative is shifting, and they're finding new ways to clamp down on competition and money. Now, Nick brought up a really great point in his article. He said that the question in this debate ultimately boils down to not the particulars of mining, but rather the societal merit of non-state money. And I think that hits the nail on the head. People look at this and they say, well, it's a waste of energy because we've already got money. Why do we need this thing that's burning all this, using all this electricity and burning fossil fuels and all of this when we have everything that we need? And those people completely miss the point that we do not have everything we need. That's the whole reason Bitcoin was created. It was created as an alternative because this existing system has so much wrong with it. It is so corrupt. It very much has the scales tilted in corporate favor, in politicians' favor, and it doesn't give people any control over their finances because savings just evaporate at the whim of an elitist who we don't even get to vote into power. So it's a hugely important tool for freedom for people all around the world. And people, first of all, need to wrap their heads around that and stop living in this world where they're like, well, I'm comfortable with my credit card, therefore everyone must be comfortable, not realizing that half the world is unbanked and people don't have credit cards and they can't use this thing. And so it is this tool for freedom. But on the other side of things, the mining debate is a hugely important one because people don't understand how electricity works. They don't understand that it's not this fungible, transportable things. If you generate too much electricity, that can't just get stored in batteries, because battery technology just has not evolved at the same rate as our generating capacity, right? So what happens is that electricity actually goes to waste. Now, if you look at where most of the Bitcoin mining is occurring, it's occurring in these fringe areas where that electricity would otherwise just like evaporate and get deleted, or whatever happens to it. It would just get negated. So people are taking advantage of, for example, you've got lots of hydropower in China where they're generating far more electricity that can fit in the grid. I think in Sichuan, it's about 50% more. It's crazy amounts more electricity. And so that's where heaps of Bitcoin miners are. They're using this excess electricity. So it's not actually that we're burning fossil fuels and what all the naysayers are doing. It's mainly renewable energies, and it's mainly stuff that would otherwise go to waste.
Yeah, I think this is like a hugely important issue, one that we're seeing percolate back up, kind of whenever there's a boom in crypto, it seems like. And, even just speaking, this is not something like I follow super closely, but it really just seems like it's two binary options. It's like, it's all this energy, and then it's like, no, this actually isn't an issue. And I think Nick does a really good job of getting into the nuances of this. Because it is really tricky and it is really difficult to convey without, like we were just talking about Ethereum and gas fees and all these other things. And like, there's a whole lot of technical stuff that goes into these networks. And that needs to be unpacked in such a way that I don't think they are currently. There's like a lot of it feels at least like a lot of back of napkin math going on when some of these energy costs are being calculated. But I do think that a huge part of this issue is, Bitcoin is seen as this something that is like outside of society, and it's just a addition that's being tossed into the world writ large, where we've already seemingly like factored in all these other things that we assume are just part of society and therefore valuable. And Bitcoin is not necessarily. Like, I mean, even Nick gets at this, and Naomi, you hit on it, the societal value of some of these assumptions. Like, why do we assume like Christmas lights are needed? Like there's a whole bunch of different things that go into, our baked in views of how the world is and not maybe how it could be. So I think that's something that's really just worth diving into depth here. It's worth like going beyond some of the articles that are currently out there and really understanding it. And I think Nick's op-ed does a really good job of walking readers through that in a nuanced way.
Yeah, I think with any emerging technology, people who don't really understand what's going on are going to start to grasp at things that they do understand, and maybe energy consumption and climate is something that we can all understand, and they're going to start to poke holes there. So I think the more conversations we have, and the more that we can talk about these things and let people know that actually some of the things that are happening in the mainstream and the things that people are saying in the mainstream are not true is great. So that's my take.
Yeah,
Well,
it's absolutely an issue.
Well, we'll toss that to Ben as we kind of wrap it up there. But Ben, you're talking about Egypt and Bitcoin and the government trying to shut down people using it there.
Yeah, so this was really interesting. This was Sandali's piece that went live today. And, Sandali has done a really good job of just looking outside of the US and talking about Bitcoin use cases and how it's being used, and how people are thinking about it as, something other than necessarily a store of value where you just park money in a savings account, for example. And this article is all about huge increases in kind of the use and rise of Bitcoin in Egypt, despite the fact that, because of religious law there, it's technically banned, was what I understood from reading the article. But even so, some UK-based exchanges, one in particular, saw, I believe, a 400% rise in kind of users registering that lived in Egypt just from December of 2020 to January 2021. There has also been larger growth from peer-to-peer Bitcoin exchanges within Egypt. But I just thought this was really interesting and a good use case and a good option and way to kind of step outside of our US point of view when we're thinking about Bitcoin. So, Naomi, you think about this a lot in people that are, living off the grid and really experimenting with cryptocurrencies in ways that don't interact with states. So I'd be curious to get your thoughts on this one.
For sure. I mean, I think it's a super interesting case example of a society where Bitcoin has essentially been banned, like trading crypto there is not allowed, and yet it still thrives. So if we're wondering, is Bitcoin going to disappear? Is the US government going to clamp down? And are they going to ban it completely? This potentially, highlights what could happen. People still use it, right? So it's very interesting also because there's so much political turmoil in Egypt, and they really do need an alternative there. People are looking for alternatives outside of the government. So it is interesting that they're going for crypto, and it's really nice they have that alternative there, for sure. I also think at the world at large, as more and more governments start to clamp down on cryptocurrency and start to roll in laws, what does it all mean at the end of the day? To me, when I look at what's going on in Egypt, they have these blanket rules and then they selectively enforce them. If you actually look at the outcome of these regulations, they're picking winners and losers, and they're using as a tool, a coercive tool, to persecute certain people and not others. So it really, when you're talking about this sort of regulation, it really just is a tool for government power to, selectively enforce things. So I'm very much against all of that. But it is nice to see that the people there still seem to have options and have a way around that selective enforcement to try and, balance the scales again.
Yeah, and something Sandali brought up, that was brought up by kind of the heads of some of these exchanges, was that, the people that are accessing Bitcoin in Egypt right now are having to do it in the most friction-filled way possible. It is really hard to do. And so, Zack, as our resident, I'm here for the ease of use sort of thing. I'm curious to get your thoughts about people, jumping through the hoops, even when it's really challenging, because they feel a need and a desire to access this crypto.
That's right. Convenience desk here for all your easy breezy needs. Convenience is relative, right? And it's situated in a context in which, financial freedoms are a bit limited. So, the impetus for me to take those steps, even with the friction that they entail, may be quite different than in the Western context. And I think that's really where Bitcoin is fascinating, right? Bitcoin may be so inconvenient for, living a privileged life in the West, but given other political contexts in places overseas, those hurdles are certainly worth jumping. And I think we see that in many places around the world, whether it's Nigeria, whether it's Egypt. There's a laundry list of countries where, peer-to-peer markets are actually quite lively, and people are, transacting in this stuff and storing their wealth in this stuff in an environment that's unstable financially. So I think, to Naomi's point, Bitcoin and cryptocurrency as an option is something that probably should be seen as a valid option for a lot of people, and should be protected as such when it can be. So I think that I think the convenience thing is cool, but in all seriousness, convenience is a relative term depending on the situation in which you find yourself, and Bitcoin can be a far easier solution than some of the alternatives.
Yeah, and I think that's kind of what I was getting at. It's just a huge part of this, debate and this continuation of this narrative is just being able to readily assess what, whether it's privacy, whether it's, financial freedom, assess what your needs are and what people might overcome. But Naomi, I'm going to toss this over to you.
Absolutely. So I'm actually going to dive straight into the next topic and talk about whether or not Biden now has big tech in the crosshairs. So today he named Tim Wu to the National Economic Council as Special Assistant to the President for Technology and Competition Policy. Now, the National Economic Council is basically the principal forum used by the president for considering economic policy. So they've just put one of the most outspoken critics against big tech into a very powerful position. So I'm wondering what that means. I have very strong opinions about this, but I'm wondering whether to lay that out and let people fight with me, or then just throw it to the group first. So I'm going to do that one. I'm going to throw it to you guys and see what your take on all of this, and we'll kind of hash it out, mind the pun.
My take is you should duke it out. The extent of my take is I met Tim Wu once, and we
want to hear your take, Naomi.
Cool.
I've got a lot of thoughts, and I want to let somebody else jump in first.
Go.
No, Ben, you do yours. Then we'll chat about it.
So, zooming way out, right? I think this is really interesting because I personally, in the models of centralized versus decentralized, I think of antitrust as a really kind of writ large version of decentralization, kind of playing out in real time. And this is such an interesting one because antitrust is something where you have progressives, you have conservatives, and you have libertarians coming together around this one issue, albeit with very different motivations. But I think it shows that there's an appetite for breaking up huge, centralized, powerful actors here. And, Tim Wu's been incredibly vocal in this space. He was, a part of the Obama administration in terms of doing this and has faced some criticism for not being tough enough on tech companies like this in the past. So I think this will be an interesting addition. Maybe he's learned from that previous experience, but this is somebody who coined the phrase net neutrality. And I think, writ large is going to be a really good addition to the Biden administration. Interestingly enough, continuing to take a very critical view on tech that the Trump administration did as well. Again, with different motivations, I think it's fairly clear. But Naomi, come back to me. What are your thoughts?
All right, just going to put on my fighting gloves for a second to get ready for this. So when you talk about antitrust as a tool for decentralization writ large, I would really strongly disagree with that, because I think it gives even more power to the government to pick the winners and the losers, which is exactly what they do. I mean, we've heard the fears of monopolies all throughout history. All these companies that government says, they're a monopoly, and it's ended up not being true. This has happened across the board in the tech industry. It's just proven not to be true. The biggest antitrust case that we know of is the Microsoft one, right? And right in the middle, before they even got to the end of the case, Apple had already surpassed them in market share. So, all of this stuff, for me, if I want to hate a company, I want to talk about what they're actually doing wrong. There are lots of reasons to hate big tech. There are lots of privacy violations. There are lots of things about, to do with censorship or to do with promotion of awful things. There are lots of reasons people can jump on this. I don't think hating them because the market has decided to give them a chunk of money or business because they provided something valuable is a reason. So I have never liked the idea of antitrust for philosophical reasons. I think it's a crazy idea that the government should step in and choose winners and losers and say, you provide too much value. Too many people want to use your service, Google, because you're definitely the easiest and most effective search engine, and advertising tool on the planet. But we're going to destroy that. I just think that's a crazy idea. I think the biggest danger of the Tim Wu appointment is that he is first of all, there's so much inconsistency there. So one of the things people are saying is this is the shot in the arm that competition policy needs. It's no, this is the government once again picking winners and losers. And then on the other side of things, you have people who say these tech giants have failed to live up to the promises to protect user data. And it's I'm sorry, but the Pfizer court literally last year, a few months ago, put out this giant report that said of the thousands and thousands and thousands of data collection requests that the FBI made, 7 of them were legitimate. So it is the government we should be focusing on when it comes to our privacy as citizens, and not breaking up companies that people are voluntarily giving their money to. If I want to stop Google doing those things and getting my data, it means I don't have to use Google. I can use DuckDuckGo. I can use Proton Mail. I can use all the tools I currently am using. Google doesn't have to have anything in my life.
It's because they have massive market shares, and because nobody's going to use a smaller competitor that doesn't have the chance to scale yet.
Everyone does. The same reason that WhatsApp just lost all their customers, which is a Facebook company, and everyone went to the smaller Telegram and Signal, is because it's precisely because they started doing bad things with data policy, and individuals knew that they had a choice, and so they went to what they thought was a better choice. So as long as there is no government putting a gun at your head and saying, you cannot, you have to use this service, consumers absolutely have choice. And I think that it is a misrepresentation, and it's an infantilization of people to say, we don't respect that you have autonomy and choice. You're forced into making these decisions. I think that's bollocks, Ben. Come on.
I think the antitrust thing is so okay. Jump in here, Jen.
No. I just wanted to ask you a question. Do you think the average consumer knows they have a choice?
Absolutely. I mean, everyone has heard of Signal now because you have it talked about on the news all the time. As we said before in the other show this week, it was the biggest digital migration we've seen in history. And that is simply because of some privacy policy that no one usually reads, right? WhatsApp says changes some little thing. Millions of people migrated.
Facebook, Instagram. Do you think the average consumer knows that they have a choice to go somewhere else, and that their
the average
audience might go there, their communities are going to go there? I don't think they know that.
So exciting news there. Well, I will say yesterday I actually reached 40,000 subscribers on Library. Thank you very much. I'm 1,000 away from it beating my YouTube platform, and I think it was 10 times more views on my recent video on Odyssey than I did on YouTube. So I'm a consumer who understands that I have a choice. I'm trying to educate people about those choices and say, hey, go to these other platforms where you might make more money. It's decentralized, you won't be censored, and you'll get more views. I think that these companies shoot themselves in the foot. We don't need the government to come in and say, we're forcing you to do this because they make terrible decisions. They grow so large, they become behemoths that can't pivot and can't, follow what their market actually wants. And they end up losing huge market share, which is what we've seen on a lot of platforms. So I
Amazon
think these things work themselves out. Well, Amazon is a forced monopoly because you have the government. No, I think that Amazon is an interesting gray area where we probably agree that there is a lot of government propping it up, and it's kind of an enforced monopoly. Some people would disagree. I know Stossel disagrees with me on that one, but I definitely do see some shady stuff going on at Amazon that I wonder whether there is legitimate market competition still operating there.
I do think that we've also just the idea of antitrust with the measure of what an antitrust is like a harm to consumers is like an outdated one. I don't think the things that make it incredibly easy for us to access these services and might not harm us in ways that are quite visible is like a readily reliable metric for governing what is a trust and what is not at this point. We've seen the fact that these things are so easy because they abuse your data, because they, foster tons of different issues within society that we're talking about right now. And if they become so large that they offer basically function as quasi nation states, which kind of is how Facebook functions. They have a freaking Supreme Court in a lot of ways. There can be another mechanism that can come in and address that. And I think that, you've seen this with Facebook buying up Instagram, Facebook buying up every single competitor it can. So I think this is one tool in a toolbox for addressing power more generally. And I don't think it's one that we can readily discount based on where we're at in the world right now.
All right, I'm going to ring the bell there as the referee. I must step in.
We'll take it aside, Naomi.
We have bloodied heads here. You guys got to go to your corners, okay? It's going to be all right.
These knuckles.
Are the three of us
I feel like Funkmaster Flex at the freestyle cipher right now, and I just want to be like, woo! I want to make ad libs, but that's for next week. So anyway, come back for the freestyle Friday freestyle next week on the Hash, and you should have a great weekend until then. But hey, if you want to watch more great content, stick around on CoinDesk TV for all about Bitcoin. That's at 3 p.m. Eastern. Until then, hey, I'm Zack Seward. We got Naomi Brockwell. We got Ben Powers, Jen Sanasie, Will Foxley. We'll be back again next week on the Hash. Thanks so much for sticking with us. You're the best.
Bye.
Have a good weekend, y'all.
Love you, Ben.
Yeah.
Happy weekend.
Cheers, always.